I'm always nervous to get an applause before I start, because that raises expectations, I feel. It's undeserved. I hope I'm going to deserve it in the end as well. So hi, I'm Ela Varošanec Krsnik, and here are a few things about me. Just to put in context who am I and why am I talking about AI in literary translation today, what give me credentials. Viruet already said something, so I'm just going to add that. So I work as a professional literary translator. That would mean that I'm dedicated exclusively to literary translation. I used to do other type of translations, but I decided to be poor and happy. So that's why, well, I see that there are more literary translators here that recognize themselves. I translate from Spanish mostly, but also a bit from English. I translated about 40 books so far, from fiction, non-fiction, children books, etc. So I have experience in various literary genres as well. I'm also a member of Croatian Literary Translators Association, which is the same as yours, and currently I'm board member. I'm saying that because I know a bit about politics of AI and everything, working conditions, etc., just for a bit of context. And I'm delegate to CEATL. I don't know if everybody here is from the association. No, right? Yeah, okay. So just to widen a bit, what is CEATL? It's a non-profit umbrella organization founded in '93 to represent and support literary translators. Association across Europe. We are 38 member associations from 30 countries, representing more than 12,000 individual translators, which is quite a number, I think. And as such, we, let's say, have a mandate to follow authors' rights, work on visibility, work on improving of working conditions, etc. And AI, and unfortunately, from 2022, we are also following closely the development of AI. I'm saying unfortunately because it has impacted already in these 4 years since it came into being our profession deeply. I've been following it since it appeared, and when I say following it, I follow it in the context of literary translation. So I know some technical things, I know some things from other fields, but mostly my focus was working conditions, authors' rights, etc. of literary translators. And also very important language, because it's our tool and it's something that we are kind of bound to protect in literary translations. If you want to see a bit more about CEATL, you can go and visit the page. I hope there are some future colleagues as well that they're going to be interested in that as well. So enough about me. Quick question. Who here, I see different age groups and I guess different statuses. Who here translated at least one book? Okay. Who here translated anything, like a poem for a magazine? Anything that's published? So, okay. Okay, just to have an idea, who here would like to be a translator? Okay, fair enough. No, that's great. And who would like to be a translator of literature? Okay, great. It's just a bit to know the audience, because it wouldn't make sense to talk in depth about literary translator if half of the audience is just interested in what AI can do. So it would have to be impromptu, quick change of my presentation. But anyway, what I'm going to talk about, apparently, is generative artificial intelligence and how it affects our profession. So why am I going to be talking about that before I say what I'm going to talk about? And maybe the important question is why. You might have noticed that artificial intelligence is everywhere. Just to give you a few examples, a few days ago, I went to a speech therapist with my son, and there was a big billboard saying conference, speech therapy, and artificial intelligence. Yesterday, I've seen on one airport like a commercial for AI-powered toilet. So when we say it's everywhere, it's everywhere. The thing with it being everywhere is also that it seems all-powerful. Because there is lots of talks about everything it can do. And I would say that when we talk about generative artificial, first, there are lots of types of artificial intelligence. Mostly what came into being and the new thing from 2022 is generative artificial intelligence, and that is what I'm going to be talking about today. So not to me saying generative every time, just to be clear that I'm talking about that. I'm going to explain in a moment what I'm referring exactly. But there is a lot of money in that field. Unprecedented amounts of money are put in development of generative artificial intelligence right now. For me, unimaginable amounts of money. And of course, the companies that are developing it want us all to believe that it's all powerful. I think it's very, very important, crucial even, to recognize its limitations so we can decide what to do with that and to start to be much more critical about its usage and also about its impact on our everyday life. Today, obviously, I'm going to be talking about its impact on literary translation, but lots of things can be applied on other areas of our lives as well. So I'm going to start with definition of generative artificial intelligence and just a quick look at how it works. I'm not tech expert, so don't worry, I'm not going to get super technical into details because I can't and because it's not important in this outlook. Then I'm going to compare artificial intelligence with neural machine translation, because sometimes I get asked, but neural machine translation has been here for a while, and we are still all alive and working in translation. So what does generative artificial intelligence brings that wasn't already there in neural machine translation, or so-called CAT tools? There is also, I'm going to talk about its issues regarding linguistic, legal, and ethical problems. What problems and issues does it pose to literary translation in this sense? I'm going to talk very briefly about inherent humanity of literary translation process. I think that's a very important point. I'll explain why. Impact on working conditions and incomes of literary translators. That's something to have in mind. And also here are colleagues that might still not be affected, but I'm afraid in a short while we all smaller countries, bigger languages, more like smaller languages are going to be affected. I'm going to give you possible pro-arguments for use of generative artificial intelligence, although I'm quite critical about it. We're going to talk about is ethical use of generative AI possible, and in the end, I'm going to offer few tips and tricks, because although I'm very critical of generative artificial intelligence, I think it can be used as a tool in a translation, and also that we should all kind of keep on our toes, and digitalization is an important part of our everyday life. So let's start with the question, what is generative artificial intelligence? Very basic definition is that generative artificial intelligence is a type of technology designed to create new original content based on massive databases on which it is trained. So we are going to stop here for a few seconds or minutes to see first what does massive databases imply. So massive databases is basically for ChatGPT-5, whole internet. And I'm not joking. Last year, there was a seminar about development of ChatGPT-5 before it got out. And there were people who seriously doubted that it could get out because the whole internet was already in ChatGPT 4.5. And they just lacked new data to train the model to make a difference. Well, it's out, so there are some, obviously, changes, but it's still a massive amount of data. Where does literary translation and literature comes in here? Well, books in general are very good material for training of these models, because they're coherent, long data sets. So it's way better for a model, for its consistency, to be trained of this kind of material than to be trained of Facebook post of your aunt's friend. And how do companies get to the books? Well, as it has been proven in few cases, and there are lawsuits, not in necessarily legal ways. Why? Because negotiate with every single author or even authors' agencies, piece by piece, would be quite, as they quoted in one chat, long-term. They don't have time. And also it's cheaper just to go to piratized web pages, get the book sets that are there and steal them. There is a big discussion and a big backlash about that, but few of companies, big players in the industry, are proven to have done just that. Still illegally uploaded books. So these are this massive data set. Original content, why is this with a question mark? Well, I still have personal doubts if this collage of stolen data could be really called original content. How much of it is original? But that's something maybe to think about and decide by yourself. How does it work, and how does it work in translation? So basically it is trained on these big data sets, and then when it translates, when it generates text, it recognizes patterns. So basically it predicts statistically most probable next word. Obviously, for literary translation, that's not ideal, because literature is just opposed to statistical probability, linguistically speaking, I'd say. The other problem, which is also a bit of problem with transparency, is that one part of how it works we know. So it's trained on a massive data sets. There are some algorithms programming that kind of puts them into being, and then it's a black box. What does it mean? That means that the people who are working on it, so the same engineers of artificial intelligence, don't really know how models come to the solution. How they generate what they generate, how they, let's say, decide. I'm anthropomorphizing a machine, but we all do that. We still don't have meta language that would distinguish it from human behavior. How they decide what is going to be the output? That is a huge transparency problem, not just for literary translation, but for humanity in general, because it's becoming increasingly hard to control more advanced models. So that's something that we'll see what's going to happen with that in the future. But also, one of the arguments why literary translators and authors are not paid for their work is companies claim that they don't know which parts of this massive data sets are actually used by artificial intelligence model for training. So basically, they offer them a plate, but they have no idea what they ate from that plate. So they're not even sure what data is inside the model. Okay? Does that make sense so far? It's scary. I'm purposely not trying to simplify this part because I'm more and more terrified. With every new and more advanced model, I'm getting more and more uneasy. Not about literature, not about our profession, but about humanity as a whole. Like, I've read too many dystopian novels not to be a bit disturbed. But okay, now seriously, is it everything clear so far, more or less? Can I get a yes? Yes. Okay, no, I'm asking the end of the room as well, back of the room as well, because I see some confused faces. So, next question is leaving a bit this technical part, well, staying on a technical part just a bit more, because the question that we get a lot regarding translation in general is what is the difference between general artificial intelligence and neural machine translation, and why is it a bigger threat? My first question is actually, have anybody who has been translating literature been using CAT tools in translation of literature? No, right? No, it's okay. I've tried years ago, but as neural machine translation is task specific and works sentence by sentence, it was always completely useless to me for translating literature. I played with everything digital because I'm just interested and curious of how that works. But when you translate literature text, you would look a paragraph, you would look a whole work content. So going this fragmentization sentence by sentence is not just useless, it's also harmful because it kind of fragments the translation process, at least for me. But let's go on a difference and why then the generative artificial intelligence would be more dangerous for our jobs as literary translators. Why is it a threat? So it's the way those two work are basically completely different. So a neural machine and NMT is task specific, which means that it was made to do one task, and that is translation. For example, DeepL. Have anybody here used DeepL at some point? Yeah, okay, so you know how it works. Google Translate is the older version, but you know it's pros and cons, right? Like Google Translate had that hilarious translations. If you back translate it, you would get like a soup. You would get English translation. Well, you would translate from French, but get kind of English translation into Lithuanian. That, I guess, happened. That's because it's just mapping source text and target text, basically working on parallel corpora. So that means that you have to put a big data set again, or corpora, which means great number of texts in Lithuanian and great numbers of text in Croatian, and it's going to be looking for sentence pairs, word pairs, phrases pairs, and that's how it's going to translate, basically. So it's going to go directly from Lithuanian to Croatian based on that corpora. If it doesn't have enough material, it would, as Google Translate, use bridge language, and it would be a mostly useless soup. It works sentence by sentence, so as I said, in literary translation sense, it's not really what we are looking for. It requires fine-tuning for customization, which means that when you translate text by neural machine translation, you have to go basically by hand through it to customize it, because you cannot just give it a command to customize it differently. It requires term basis, so it works on term bases, which are big sets of data, again, not so massive, not even close as massive as it, and more targeted. The good thing about it, apparently, is that it's fast and cost-effective, speaking in a computationally sense. As for generative AI, it kind of understands meaning. Again, humanization, but it's hard not to do that. It uses monolingual data and general reasoning, which means that it works from the language itself, works through algorithm. It doesn't translate from language to language, but it basically translates every word, into algorithms, and then gives us back another language. So it can work in other way. It looks through full document, so not by sentence, so it recognizes wider context, let's say. It's customized through prompting, so you would get a generated text and you would say, no, I would like it to sound more formal, more polite. I know you all here used generative artificial intelligence at some point, I don't know, to write a letter to your lawyer, health insurance, or wherever, and you said, make it sound more lawyerish. No, nobody here did that? No, just me? Okay. Okay. And then you look at it and you look at it, it's like, oh, I sound so professional. I didn't get damages from the health insurance, not even with the help of ChatGPT, I have to tell you so. It doesn't use term bases, it uses whole internet, depending on training data, but the big models here are basically using whole internet nowadays. But it's way more computatively expensive, which means that uses more energy, basically. Also, you wouldn't be able to put whole text in it, like whole book. You would have to be generating it piece by piece, etc., etc. Why is it more dangerous for literary translation? Well, one of the reasons is because what people believe it can do. It can be very convincing, as lawyerish text has proven you. It can work through full context. It's apparently creative. Now, we can discuss that, but it seems to be more creative. It's not really easy to compare those two in terms of translations because they do different things. But, however, new translation tools like CAT tools, etc., are using those two combined with some other techniques. So the enemy got their guards all together. So basically most of CAT tools nowadays would be using both of these approaches and few more to be more efficient. Okay? Now we are going into humanistic part. Ethical, legal, and linguistic outlooks and issues. Could anybody tell me what is the first ethical, legal, or linguistic issue that comes to mind when we are talking about generative artificial intelligence and literary translation? Copyright, obviously. Big legal and ethical issue. I already said something about it. Anything else? Mistranslation, yes. And a certain responsibility we have to original author, original work. Not certain, but complete responsibility and dedication.
Ideological bias.
Ideological bias, I didn't mention it here, but that's a huge problem. Because obviously, artificial intelligence is supposed to be unbiased, but it is trained on the internet. Is it internet biased? No, not the least. I mean, internet is the most biased place we could find. I mean, well, it's obvious. And also if you think, even if you think about books it's trained on. So it's not trained just on 20th century literature, 21st century literature. It's trained on 18, 19, well, that's even legal because it's in most countries after 75 years of disease it's open source, let's say, books. So, I mean, like, they're very racist books, great works, but still. So, yes, that is a big problem. Well, let's see some of them that I stressed out. One of the issues that we already mentioned is that basically what generated text is collage of other people's works. Now, I often hear, but yes, also anything what we do is a collage of other people's works because it's based on our knowledge and all art is imitation, etc. Yes, but no. The way we process knowledge, I would argue, and the way that this knowledge belongs to us is quite different than the way the artificial intelligence models are processing it. First, just for the pure scale of it, it's impossible for us to ever obtain, not knowledge, to obtain that much information as artificial intelligence model has. And also, what is inherently human is not necessarily also belongs to the machine. Creative work, I would say, yes, it is a result of our experiences and everything we read, saw, etc., but not in the same way that is generated text is, because it's literally takes from different. There is one research also that shows, it's from 2023, that shows that it can, if prompted properly, it can actually replicate works that it was trained on. So there is a big ethical question if it's okay for us to generate text, then put our name, sign under something, how much we should work on that to become truly ours. I would argue at no moment it becomes truly ours. Then there is this issue with helping in model training, because our every interaction with artificial intelligence basically serves for improving the models. Some models are very explicit about it. For example, Gemini states it few times when you start to use it, and during the usage, you can find that. ChatGPT, not so much, but if you go in a background, you'll find it. Claude, I don't know, I haven't used it a lot, but I'm sure it does the same thing. So every time you input something or you output something, every time you talk with it, you are improving the model. Whatever you put in it, it's going to be used for that. Now, is it a good thing or bad thing? We can discuss it. Talking about literary translation profession, I would say it's quite damaging. And the one thing I'll mention here that is not directly connected with literary translation, but use it more in more general sense, is definitely environmental impact. So generating one AI image consumes between 5 and 50 liters of water. Think about that before you generate your next picture with your cute cat or imaginative cat or whatever. We all done that. Now, is there anybody here who never used, well, I have to say, never used to generate any picture? Well, great for you. You saved a lot of water. I've used it once to generate image. I used it once, and because I didn't know, and then I realized how ridiculous amount of water and energy is spent on something. It's not even interesting to me, so I decided to stop. I mean, this is approximation. But basically what happens, it's not that AI drinks water, obviously. It's that because of the way the system cools, and that's by evaporating, that's called evaporating cooling. it's made in the dry areas. And it's hot, so they have to cool the machine's data sets. Basically, the companies themselves, more or less, but also environmentalists, were measuring, considering certain parameters, how much of the water is needed, because they know how much energy is needed to produce one image, and then how much water is needed to cool the system so it would work. For now, they're even planning to do a big AI data set plant in space. Well, they're planning to make a hotel on Moon as well, so we'll see what's going to be happening with that. But for now, most of the big companies have their bases, their factories, basically in the dry areas because of these cooling things I was telling you about. There is additional problem with that apart from using lots of water, and that is that it dries water from the area. So people living there, communities living there, actually there are a few of them that had to, in California, that have to kind of evacuate to other area because that area became too dry. So these are all things to think about, just to be aware what we are doing when we are using ChatGPT to ask for a recipe for dinner with leftovers in the fridge. Obviously, the text generation is a bit less. I was talking here about picture, but still. Legal issues, well, we said more or less everything about that. There are lots of legal issues, but I pointed out authors' right here from two perspectives. So first of all, there is input, so what do we put inside? When we decide to translate something with artificial intelligence, the issue is that we don't have permission to feed other people's works to artificial intelligence model. We would need to have an explicit approval from author that he is okay with that. Otherwise, we are infringing on his author's right. Now, some of you who are not in literary translation might ask, so what is problematic about it? Well, author's rights are basis for authors to be paid, basically. So if you give somebody's work to artificial intelligence, first you stole that work because you had no right to do that. Second of all, you're basically cutting his income. Third, that's also go for stealing books. Lots of people are downloading books from illegal sites, and some questions may arise is kind of how is it different that companies are doing that same? Well, first, obviously, it's the scale, because the scale they're doing it is enormous. Second, they're doing it to train models that they're going to make money on, and that they're also possibly going to steal the jobs from the same people that you steal first. And the second issue is, of course, you shouldn't be stealing books from the internet, because with every stolen book, you literally steal 10 euros, 15 euros, 20 euros from the author of the book. Because if you have bought it a certain amount, even if it's digital, even if it's not physical, because sometimes people feel because it's not physical that you didn't really do anything bad. Well, even the digital books, author would get certain revenue. In some countries, Croatia is not one of them, I'm not sure if Lithuania is, there are also royalties for literally translators, which mean that from every sold book, they get certain percentage, be that 1 up to 10%, I think that's like the most they would get. I don't know, in Lithuania you have royalties, so yes. So every time you download book from illegal site translated, you're stealing from these people that are in front here. And it's very real consequences. Well, going back here, on the output perspective, there is a legal question of who is the author of generated text. Because in European legal system, in most European legal systems, I think Ireland is the only exception, an author is defined as natural person, which would mean always human being, who creates an original work, exercising creative freedom and making free and expressive choices. Now, there have been a few lawsuits, mostly in USA, but until now, practically nobody, especially speaking about generated text, has proven that there is enough control of generated content so it could be considered an original work of the author, of the person who prompted the model. So basically, if you generate translation, even if you work on it later on, you are committing plagiarism possibly. If you're doing that in the kind of prompted by a publishing house, it's likely that they don't give you copyright or authorship. And who does that work belong to? It's very complicated because model cannot be an owner company, AI company cannot be the owner of that, cannot have a copyright. But you wouldn't be able to have it either. So it's a bit of a conundrum there. And now something that personally terrifies me and which I find the most unsettling thing, talking about translation and Gen AI, is our linguistic issues and how artificial intelligence affects the language. Now, there are some studies that already shows that there is significant cognitive decline in teenagers who had been using artificial intelligence in their developing linguistic years. Literature that would be translated by this, by generative artificial intelligence would have a certain number of problems that would affect not just our reader, but I think society as a whole, because artificial intelligence already is slowly changing the language among younger people, it seems, that have a less developed language apparatus. One of the first things is that considering that vast majority of training data for most used models is in English. Text is generated in other languages, even not necessarily translated ones, would have English structures. Now, that is not English structure as we found them in Google Translate that are very obvious, but now it's more syntactic, it's more deeply embedded in structure, and sometimes it takes a lot of time and effort to actually recognize them, especially because younger generations, I would include myself there, because we are heavily influenced by English. I mean, most of the content I consume, I hate the word content, so most of the artistic works I consume, also the word I don't like, is in English, visual content, so series, movies. I try to read, well, I force myself to, I try to read even books that are in languages I know, for example, Spanish or English, in Croatian, because I learn a lot from my colleagues, but the rest of the, I don't know, newspapers, media, etc., it's in English, and English is influencing my Croatian, although I would say that, that my Croatian is above average because I'm a linguistic professional, let's say. So English here is not a bridge language in traditional sense, like it was in Google Translate, but it's underlayered because of the training data. As I said, the problem is that in most European countries, I would say, languages are already under the influence of English and under the influence of English structures. So the theories with more content being translated by Gen AI, which is already happening in media, for example, that this is going to get deeper and deeper, and that we are going to see the effects of it pretty soon. The other issue is mechanic voice. I don't know, does anybody has this? I'm sure that you had the experience. So you read a text, newspaper article. Everything is kind of fine. You cannot point your finger and what's wrong, but you feel something is wrong. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes, exactly. LinkedIn is a good example, but you wouldn't be able to say this is wrong or this is wrong, but you just feel it's synthetic. You feel it's not natural. Freud calls that uncanny feeling, something that we recognize, something that is almost, for example, the robot, something that is completely like human, but there is something like our mind, our unconscious is aware that something is wrong. That affects the reading experience, but also it can affect the mental state, etc. There's some research suggesting that. One of the absolutely scariest things for me as a translator and from somebody for whom language is very important, and that's why this zombie is here, is takeover in voice and language in the translation process. So we just had a survey in Seattle in 2026 about impact of AI on the profession as a whole. And there were, in comments, few people mentioned that if they worked on generated text for a few days, that their, even people with lots of experience, that their personal language and voice was impacted to that measure that they couldn't keep translating something else for a week at a time after working on generated text. And that, I have to say, like, it's one of the scariest idea for me personally, of the impact that it has on us. Now, there is also a problem of very subtle mistakes that are harder to notice. For example, my mom is a proofreader. She's been working with literature for almost 40 years. I'll explain what is this just in a second. And she started to get the obviously generated text. Well, obviously. She says it's not obvious. The language is very convincing and fluent. And she has to read text, for example, 3 to 4 times to recognize certain mistakes. Because in the normal human text, the mistakes are more predictable, especially if you work for 40 years in proofreading. And the person who has terrible orthography kind of gives you indication that you have to be more careful. But the person who would have this very fluent text that we get from Gen AI, well, if that would be a human text, you wouldn't expect it to make any mistake. Or the mistakes it's made are completely unexpected. For example, all of the sudden wrong spelling of the word, or hallucinations. So added text, obviously my mother is not a translator, she proofreads translated text. But she has enough kind of reader and linguistic intuition to be able to recognize that something is not working. She says that it has been, for last year or so, it has been so much harder to work, especially because people don't want to recognize that they used Gen AI, so she doesn't have any warning. And these are some examples from your colleague Jonus's. I asked him to translate, revise generated translation of 2 pages of text of haunted man and Ghost's Bargain by Charles Dickens, obviously not an easy text. And he did just that. He noted that there are many instances when the chosen word is not clearly wrong, but not quite suitable. So you have here some examples of that. Take a look and tell me, do you agree? Would you notice it as a mistake? We can discuss that later, we can come back to that later and discuss it. One more thing is homogenization of language. It absolutely flattens and uniforms the language. We go back to the way it works, so statistically most probable next word. Also tends to simplify the complex structure, tends to shorten sentences. That's what we can see in media more and more. When prompted to make it sound more literature, it often borders with kitsch, so it just goes to the other direction, to what it believes it's beautiful, or how literature should sound based on the data it has. And I'm going to give you a visual example because it's very hard to explain it on text. So this is me. This is the picture, 6, 7 years younger, but still me. And this is the picture I sent to a designer, doesn't matter. And this is a picture he sent me back saying it's a way better picture. And how much, exactly. I have to say I was pretty shocked, and this uncanny feeling came over me because this is not me. This is what the machine believes I want to look like the better version. But the thing is that it's not only beautifying, it's also uniforming, because if I would put, I think we have a quite similar phenotype, Croatians and Lithuanians from what I see. If I would put picture of somebody who has my similar phenotype, probably my twin would get out, because that is what machine thinks, or based on gathered data, concludes that we want to look like. And that is what the machine does to literary texts. We don't have lots of time left, so I'm just going to very quickly say that it has a real impact on our profession. Per CEATL 2026 survey, some translators who had to work on post-editing for one reason or another, although one of my colleagues prefer word reworking, because they claim we believe it's not just editing, but you have literally reworked the text. It's more exhausting, more time-consuming. Basically, you work on 3 texts, not just 2. Source, generated text, and then your own. It's basically different kind of work altogether. Unfortunately, survey shows that post-editing offers are on rise. So in 2024 survey, just 10% of our members were offered an assignment involving machine translation. 2 years later, 26%, 20% occasionally, and 6% predominantly receive a request to post-edit. Another problem here is that it also shifts, because professional literary translators don't want to work on post-editing. So it shifts to people with no experience. I would urge young people here, students, if they are offered something like that, to refuse, because that is not translation, and that is hardly the way you will learn how to translate. Working on post-edited text is completely different than, working on generated text is completely different than working on original text, translating it from scratch, let's say. And the other thing is that you have to have extremely developed linguistic and translators' intuition skills, etc., to be able to notice things that don't work in generated text. Even the people who work in it for years say that they're having very hard time with that. So Are the small languages safe? I think I already answered that. Well, small languages, well, languages with less population. I think I already answered that question more or less during, well, we've seen the example of Haunted Man. Jonušis said that if he was presented, if he were presented with this text without knowing that this was generated, he would thought that the translator was able but inexperienced, which says something, right? It was from English to Lithuanian, so maybe the results would be worse for some other language, but I'm not completely confident in that. There is also example of Slovenia, which is more or less has the same number of inhabitants as Lithuania. They had a case of business endower, where a person decided to translate certain books that were on a list of obligatory reading for primary or secondary school, and generated translation of Dostoevsky and Dickens, I believe, and start to selling them to public libraries. It was basically an enterprise. There was no love for literature. So our Slovenian Literary Translator Association managed to stop that, but it's very much under the way. Don't think that you're safe, unfortunately. I'm going to take a few more minutes just to rebut some arguments that are pro use of Gen AI in literary translation. These are the most common ones, the ones I most heard. This is speed. We are going to be so much faster and more efficient. I have tried, because I'm working on that, and I have to say I don't feel it. If the text is completely generated, my personal literature translator's intuition doesn't permit me not to look at the original, and basically I end up doing the same work twice, but being at the same time influenced by the generated text I've seen. So I have to fight the generated text and work on my own. More books in native language. So in some countries, for example, Sweden, publishers are meeting a very real problem, and that is that young people don't want to read in Swedish or prefer to read in English. So their way to fight that is to use Gen AI to generate a text, and then people would post it, and human would post-edit them, and in that way, they could get certain titles, popular titles, faster on the bookshelves. And in that way, Swedish young people are going to read more in Swedish. I think that it doesn't work that way, that young people have other reasons why they prefer to read in English. I don't know why, but it's there. And also I have serious doubts that for Swedish language is going to be any better to have books translated by generative artificial intelligence than just for young people to read in English. Books could be translated to low resource languages like Swahili, minority and Aboriginal languages. We are going to be widening cultural horizons. Well, because all I already mentioned, no. I firmly believe that it's better for Swahili readers not to have Aristotle's than to have it translated by generative artificial intelligence. And the other problem here is that models are not trained on enough data for Aboriginal languages or minority languages, and that could actually lead to further destruction of language or actually synthetization of language. It would be absolute disaster for languages that are already in danger. Language combinations for which we lack translators. For example, in Croatia, we don't have translators for Korean. So now we are going to be able to translate books directly from Korean. And who is going to revise them? How are we going to know that that translation makes sense? There is no answer to that question, mostly. One more thing is that I hear that, but it's going to be great for genre literature. So you can see here one, obviously, rom-com or something like that. That was translated by Gen AI for Swedish market. And then our colleagues decided to see how it is. So they divided books in like 20 pages per person, and they did a revision. So this is the revision of very simple text, basically translated by Gen AI and then post-edited. So humans saw this and let this go in publishing. And the last argument is it is the future. I believe that future is what we make of it. So yes, artificial intelligence is definitely in our future, but I would argue that we should find a way to use it as a tool and not to become its tool. And, well, here's the question, is ethical use possible? That is something that we can discuss when I finish in a second. Just to end in a bit less gloomy note, because I know that lots of people are going to be using artificial intelligence as a tool, I hope, for translation. I have to say I use it myself as well, but I never use it to put whole text in it, even a paragraph. I use it for research. If you're using for research, it's very important the way you're prompting it. It's not open encyclopedia. So if you, for example, want to find out something about life of Julius Caesar, it's very good idea to give it a role. You are a prominent historian. Tell me when was the Caesar first great battle. In that way, the machine won't give you useless data or fictional data, but it would give you more kind of prominent important. It's very important also to clear definition of the task. What do we want from it to do? I would always advise, I can't believe that I'm saying that, but I would always advise the use of paid versions because there is a way better data control. In most paid versions, I know for a fact for ChatGPT and for Gemini, you can stop it to, well, you can, in the settings, you can put that it cannot retain your data, it cannot retain conversation, it cannot use anything you put in for training, etc. So, and the models are better. Also, you can put in a paid models background settings. These are some of mine. When I ask for information, include sources and links. So every time when I get an information I'm asking for, it's going to be included sources and links, and I can go directly there and check the veracity of the. When I ask you for a translation, it's obviously normally one word or a phrase. Give me 10 versions, and very important for me, do not include explanations, because sometimes when you ask for translation, it gives you 5 examples with very long explanations. That's something I don't need personally. When I ask you for translation, translate to creation. Very important one, do not make up information. It actually reduces the number of, I don't know, hallucinations or because it's more probable that the machine tells you, I don't know, I cannot find the information. And crucial and most important, not just for that, but for life in general, be very, very critical. What the machine is telling you is not the truth. It's an information. What are you going to do with it? And it can be untruth information. What are you going to do with the information? How are you going to interpret it? It's completely up to you. Never believe the machine. Check everything, especially if it's important, because, as we said already, it's biased, it's prone to mistakes, and it's very convincing. It's very hard to be sure if what it says is true or not. Well, that would be it.